Good morning to you all, and welcome to this week's edition of Keeping an Eye on the Geopolitical Ball with me, Jamie Shea, Senior Fellow at Friends of Europe. Perceptions throughout history have driven international relations, relations between states, and often armed conflicts as perceptions of the hostile behavior of one side become driven into the DNA of another side. And this is certainly the case at the moment, it seems, in relations between the West and China. Hardly a day goes by without the behavior of one side, for example, the US, the UK and Australia forming the AUKUS military pact, or in recent days, China flying its aircraft through the defense identification zone of Taiwan. This behavior elicits an immediate, very firm, strong reaction from the other side. Diplomats like to say that perception is reality. And there had been several instances in history where cooperative relations between states based on rational economic exchanges have suddenly given way to perceptions of hostile behavior or even bullying, which has made conflict, if not inevitable, at least far more likely. For instance, in the run-up to the First World War, Germany and Great Britain had cordial relations. They were each other's biggest trading partners. Four members of the British cabinet had graduated from German universities, and the British monarch was the cousin of the German Kaiser. And yet when Germany started a naval build-up in the 1890s, that rapidly swung public opinion, political opinion in London against Germany to see it as an inevitable competitor and adversary. And that was one of the causal factors of the First World War. So are we going through the same kind of syndrome of a hardening of perceptions towards dangerous confrontation between China and the West, in a way that the great historian of ancient Greece, Thucydides, warned us that the rising power, Sparta, would inevitably challenge the established power, Athens, and that would lead to a conflict. Certainly we know that once perceptions take root, they are very difficult to dislodge. They become the reference framework by which one side increasingly judges every instance of the behavior of another. And of course, in these days of the social media, these perceptions can be exaggerated, they go viral, they may not be true, but they become very prevalent and almost impossible to avoid. So let's first of all look at how Western perceptions of China are forming. In the first place, China is increasingly seen as an authoritarian, even totalitarian state that abuses the human rights of its citizens, notably the Uyghurs, Tibetans, and the democratic forces in Hong Kong. It's increasingly seen as a state that does not respect international law, violates the sovereignty of other states, particularly maritime areas in the South China and East China Seas. China is increasingly seen as aggressively pushing its economic model in developing countries through its One Belt, One Road initiative, often saddling them with lots of debt and poorly executed infrastructure projects. There's a perception too that's taking hold that China wants to dominate global supply chains and global technology and even get a monopoly power over ports, over energy supplies, over railway and other transport links. There's a perception that China is a bully, particularly when it reacts to countries that criticize its behavior, notably Australia recently, with bans on Australian wine and beef exports. There's concern about Chinese military build-up, the non-transparency of its budget, the imprecision of its nuclear doctrine, and worries too that China and Russia, as the two leading authoritarian powers, are coming together in an anti-Western military alliance. All this adds up to a sort of perception of a zero-sum game, whereby a loss for the West is immediately a gain for China, and that all hopes that China could integrate into the liberal-based multilateral order as a cooperative partner must now be abandoned, even if China is not yet seen as a direct military threat by Western countries. On the other side, though, when one speaks to Chinese officials and think tankers, as far as that is possible, one quickly realizes that China also has a set of hardening perceptions about Western behavior. For example, it sees NATO still as a Cold War military alliance that wants to resurrect a Cold War, this time against China, in order to have a threat, which it needs, and to justify increased defense spending. There's a perception that NATO is dominated by the United States, and Europeans are only going to the Indo-Pacific because the United States is telling them to, or because that's the price of securing ongoing US military protection in Europe. There's a sense that the West is out to stop China's peaceful rise, that it wants to have all of the benefits of leadership in the international system. It wants its rules to apply, and to quote again the German Kaiser from the end of the 19th century, it's not giving China its place in the sun, which its economic power and culture should give it. Therefore, that the West is behaving according to double standards, asking for understanding for its own social problems and racial tensions, but showing no tolerance whatsoever when China has to create stability domestically by itself. And there's also a sense that the West is trying to keep out Chinese technology, which is often better than Western technology or cheaper, by inventing sort of fake, bogus, security threats and cyber backdoors and so on. Finally, there's a perception in Beijing that the West is going back to the Cold War in terms of building a set of international military alliances. You remember at the time of the Cold War, it was NATO, SEATO, CENTO, the Baghdad Pact, the Rio Pact, Pactomania to contain the Soviet Union, and that China sees the Quad and AUKUS and other NATO in the Pacific as a similar kind of Western Pactomania to contain and hem in China. All of this shows, of course, that we now need to urgently look at bridge building and dialogue between China and the West to see if we can soften, if not entirely remove these perceptions before they drive both sides into a more open and dangerous confrontation. We badly need to talk to each other regularly. So it was good news this week that the NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg had his first call with the Chinese State Councillor for Foreign Affairs, Wang Yi. It's good news that today in Switzerland, the US National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan is also meeting Wang Yi. It's good news that NATO is pursuing now a systematic dialogue with China. But one swallow does not make a summer. Ad hoc meetings are fine, but we need now urgently to have hotlines, crisis communications, regular exchanges at all levels, from top to medium to bottom, particularly between our respective militaries, so that we can work on this perception gap. The great Russian novelist Dostoevsky famously said that it's very easy to condemn the evildoer. The most difficult thing is to understand him. And China and the West have to make a much greater effort to understand each other if they want to avoid future confrontation. Thank you very much for watching and listening today. I look forward to engaging with you very soon in the future. Bye for now.